Okay, I think I'm live now. I had a bit of trouble connecting, so I apologise for the delay. Welcome to Norwich. My name's Tim Taylor, and I'm here to talk about an idea called Mantle of the Expert, which has got a strange name, but hopefully by the time I finished in about 15 minutes, you'll be clearer about what this approach is about, and the name will mean something to you. It was first invented by somebody called Dorothy Heathcote in the 1980s. And Dorothy Heathcote was a teacher and an educator who worked for much of her career in Newcastle University. She was brought up in Yorkshire, and became a teacher first and an academic later. And she was very interested in drama as a medium for learning. And by the end, she was actually very famous in her time. There was a programme made about her in the early 70s on the BBC, which meant that she was sort of recognised in much of the educational world for her innovative approach. But by the sort of late 70s, early 80s, she was becoming frustrated, really, that her approach was seen as something that only she could do, that there was something special about Dorothy, and that if Dorothy wasn't in the room, then it wouldn't work. So she went back and started looking at what she was doing, and thought that if she could create a system that teachers could use, a system for ordinary teachers, teachers who weren't drama trained and drama experts, then her approach could become more widely used. And her answer to this was what she called Mantle of the Expert, and she started working on it in the early 80s, and wrote a book in 1995 called Drama for Learning. I was introduced to it in the mid 90s by one of her students called Luke Abbott, who came to work in our school, and I was fascinated by it immediately, because Luke sat down in my classroom with my class, who were 7 years old, not interested in school, not really interested in anything other than themselves. They bickered and argued and disagreed with each other, didn't really want to get on with anything that might look like learning. Anyway, Luke sat down with them, and he started talking to them about these holes that suddenly opened up in a village, and that these people who lived in the village were trapped in these holes and needed rescuing. He explained to them that it was a story, that it wasn't real, but that they could come into the story as people who were doing the job of rescuing, not as children, but as a team of experts who knew all the sorts of things that needed to be done in order to rescue people who were in dire circumstances. And within a very, very short amount of time, my class were absolutely riveted. They were drawing up plans, they were discussing with each other what kinds of equipment they were going to need. They were writing down lists of equipment, and they were transformed into people who really had a purpose other than sort of their own kind of interests. They were now fixated on the needs of these people that needed rescuing. And it really opened my eyes, because I sort of looked at them. I can remember sitting there and thinking, this is something I want to learn how to use. How do I go about learning how to use this? And I started talking to Luke, and over the next few years I sort of read everything I could. There wasn't very much at that time. Followed Luke around, wrote to him repeatedly by email, and practiced as much as I could in my classroom, trying to learn how to do the things that Luke had learned how to do with Dorothy. And gradually I started to learn how to talk in a collaborative way, to listen very carefully to what the children were telling me to do, but primarily how to use stories, fictional contexts, to make learning something that was meaningful and purposeful for children. How to create, as Luke had done, a scenario that they could get involved with, that they would find exciting, that they would see that the kinds of things that they were doing in curriculum, the kinds of things as a teacher I wanted them to learn, had purpose. That creating plans, making lists, writing letters, writing reports, doing research, collaborating, sharing ideas, problem solving, all of these things had purpose in the real world, and that you could create fiction stories. You could be archaeologists opening up an Egyptian tomb. You could be a team of mountain rescuers rescuing climbers on the sides of mountains. You could run a park full of animals. You could be on an island of dinosaurs, and the children could step into that world and be a part of that, and that they're the kinds of things that I was asking them to do in terms of my teaching would find reasons for being done in these worlds. So that's a kind of my introduction to it, really. And now to talk a little bit more about how the approach works. What it basically does is, as I say, it creates a fiction inside the classroom. Now, it's not a kind of fiction that the children step into like a simulation. It's not a simulation. They understand that it's not real, and you move as a teacher in and out of the fiction. You don't remain in it. You don't sort of step into it and then stay there for the whole time. You move in, out, and back and around it, and you examine it and you review it. And this gives enormous scope as a teacher. It means that you can talk to the children about the fiction, and then you can create resources that can then be used inside the fiction. So, for example, the team of people who are looking after the dinosaurs on the island, they're watching the dinosaurs inside the fiction. They're hiding. They don't want to be seen. They want to look at the dinosaurs in their environment, to observe them without being observed. So that's a conversation that we have together. And we say, well, how are we going to go about this? And the teacher, me, in role as one of the team, helps guide that and helps shape it and ask relevant questions. But I'm not in charge. I'm not like their boss telling them what to do. So we come to an agreement about what we're going to do. So it'll involve something like, I would expect, being camouflaged, because camouflage is important. If you want to not be seen, then you want to be blend in to the background. And we talk about, do dinosaurs have a keen sense of sight? Can they spot colour? Of course, we don't know, but we can talk about what scientists say about that. We can say, well, scientists have looked at fossil records, and they've made some predictions about what dinosaurs can see, and amongst those are the idea that dinosaurs may have had a certain kind of sight. Are they keen-eyed? Can they see movement? Well, it's probable that they can, that they are very, they're very perceptive to sudden movement. So when we're out looking at the dinosaurs, we're going to have to be careful about not moving. We're going to be camouflaged. We might build ourselves a hide so that we can look at the dinosaurs and write notes without being seen. Then we might be thinking about, well, what about smell? Do dinosaurs have a keen sense of smell? In which case, how are we going to camouflage our odor? What about sound? Are they going to hear us? So all these things become important and topics of conversation. So then we go out and imagining ourselves in the hide, looking at the dinosaurs, and we start making notes, because that's what scientists do. They look, they watch, they observe, and they record. So these notes are written down, and the children are using the vocabulary that they've learned. At any point, we can stop. So we're in the story, but we can stop. And then the teacher can then talk to the students about what's going on. Is there anything you want to change? Is there anything you want to improve? Do you want to get closer to the dinosaurs? Have you noticed any of the dinosaurs looking up and moving? Is there anything that you need help with? Is there anyone that's sort of stuck on a word that they, that they need, sort of help with spelling? So you can do that, and then you can give them the kind of support that they need, and then you can go back into the fiction, and we carry on. So we carry on looking at the dinosaurs, and so one of the dinosaurs might lift its head and turn and look at the scientists, and then it might start to move closer. So we have to be very still and very quiet as it's getting closer and closer. So it might come right up to the hide, and then it might sort of bring its head up and look. And of course, that's going to captivate the children, because there's tension in it. Most of the time when you're teaching children in class, there's no tension. But in a fictional context, you can introduce tension that will give the children excitement and enjoyment, and their writing becomes more urgent, because writing these things down, recording what's going on, and then we can come back out of the fiction again, and then we can say, well, okay, so when the dinosaur came up close, what kinds of words are we going to use? What kind of vocabulary are we going to say? Let's try and write that together. Let's say that the dinosaur turned its head slowly towards us. Its eyes perceived us, and it moved towards the opening of our hide. That's the kind of thing that you can do as a teacher. Children are writing that down, and that becomes part of their report. Now, the report is going to be sent to the client. And there's always a client in Mantle Expert. There's a team, that's the team of experts, and there's always a client. So the report is published and it's sent to the client. Now, the client, in this case, would be something like the World Wildlife Fund, who is funding this project for these scientists to go to the island. And there's going to be somebody at the World Wildlife Fund who's going to be reading the report. Now, that person will be represented by me as the teacher, but inside the story, I'm going to be somebody else. I'm going to be somebody who's in New York or London or somewhere else, who receives this report by email, who's then going to be reading this and having this information communicated to me, somebody who wasn't there. So that the children are then watching the person reading it, and then they can overhear that person talking to themselves. Oh, that's very interesting. That must have been quite a shock for them when that dinosaur came up close. But pleased to tell that they weren't seen. Oh, let's see here. What else have they? And you do that, and the children are listening in, and they can see that their writing has an effect. Here's somebody who wasn't there, who's now reading it, who now understands what happened to them, and that's what writing is for children. That's what they. That's why they're writing. They're not doing it for me as a teacher. They're doing it in order to communicate information, and the better they do that, the more sense it will make to the person reading it. So that's a commission. So the team are the scientists who are going to the island. The client is the team, the person that, or the organisation that sent them there, and the commission is the purpose, which in this case is to visit the island, watch the dinosaurs, find out what's going on as much as they can, write those things down, and then report back. And of course, in that commission, they will be required to map the island, to learn all there is to know about dinosaurs, to find out about living processes, to do loads of science, to look at weather, to look at geology, to view what's going on, what other kinds of animals there are, what other kinds of vegetation, to go under the island, to look at the caves, to look at the sea around the island, to see what's in the sea. And so you can teach wide areas of the curriculum, not all the curriculum, not all the time. That's not how Mantle Expert works. It's a particular approach where you do You target it and you use it as and when. Some teachers use it for maybe an hour a week. Other teachers use it for much more than that. And that is what the mantle of the expert is for the children who are taking on the role of these experts. They are wearing a mantle. Now, a mantle means responsibility. So if you think about responsibility for the scientists, it is all the kinds of things that scientists, if they were really doing that, would really have to do. They would really have to look carefully. They'd really have to report accurately. They'd have to try and get their facts right. They'd have to get the science right. They'd have to be careful that they didn't interfere with the lives of the dinosaurs, because they don't want interfering with. This is a research project. They're not trapped them. They're not putting them in a zoo. So that is the responsibility. Now, children don't normally have responsibility, anything like that in the real world. In the real world, you never send children into dangerous situations like that, even if that was a true situation. So, but in a fiction, if you're creating a story with them, then they can, and that's what they get excited about. And that's Mantle the Expert, briefly. I've run over my 15 minutes already, so you can see that it's not a straightforward idea. It takes a bit of explaining. It takes quite a long time to learn how to use well, but you can start using it well pretty quickly. There's a book. This is the book that I wrote, called The Beginner's Guide to Mantle the Expert. There's a website called mantletheexpert.com. You can get in touch with us. You can ask questions. There's a whole community of people using Mantle the Expert, not just in this country, but now all over the world. There's big projects going on in New Zealand. There's another one going on in Belgium. There's a one that's been running for 10 years in Palestine. And we are always looking to help and support people who are interested in learning the approach. So please get in touch if you are interested. And I hope that's been helpful. And that is my time over. So goodbye, and thank you very much.